My name is Jocelyn Marsh. I'm 27 years old. 9 months ago, I walked across a stage at the Harrington University commencement ceremony in a black cap and gown, shook the hand of the president of the university, accepted my diploma, and heard my name read aloud to a crowd of 4,000 people. 40 minutes before that happened, my parents were standing in the lobby of the venue, telling everyone they knew that I had dropped out. I want to say that again, because it still requires a moment to fully land. My parents, who had driven 3 hours to attend my graduation, who had posed for photos with me in the parking lot, who had hugged me and said they were proud, walked into that lobby and told my aunt, my 2 cousins, my childhood best friend Petra, and 3 family friends who had known me since I was in diapers, that I had not actually finished my degree, that I had quietly left school the previous semester, that today's ceremony was something I was attending to support a friend, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding they were trying not to make a scene about. What none of them knew, what my parents could not have calculated, was that Dr. Patricia Wembley, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, had arrived at the ceremony early to find her reserved seat. Her reserved seat was 3 rows directly behind my parents. She had been seated there for 11 minutes when my mother began talking. Before I tell you what happened in that auditorium, please like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? I love connecting with every single one of you. Now let me take you back to where this really began. I grew up in a small city in central Ohio, the younger of 2 daughters, in a house where the rules about success were specific and inflexible. My older sister Renee had gone to nursing school, graduated in 3 years, gotten a job at a hospital 12 minutes from our parents' house, and bought a townhouse in the same zip code where we had grown up. My parents treated this sequence of events as the correct answer to a question they had been waiting for someone to get right. I was supposed to get it right next. My father managed a warehouse distribution center and came home every evening with a particular tiredness that I understood, even as a child, was the tiredness of a man who had not chosen his life so much as arrived at it. My mother worked as a dental hygienist and ran our household with a precision that left very little room for deviation. She loved us, I have never doubted that, but her love expressed itself primarily as management, and what she most wanted to manage was the shape of our futures. Renee's future had the right shape. Mine kept resisting. I had known since I was 14 that I wanted to study literature, not as a hobby, as a discipline, as a way of understanding the world, as a thing I wanted to spend my working life inside of. I had read voraciously since I was 8, written obsessively since I was 11, and had a sense of what I was for that was quiet and certain in the way that the deepest true things about yourself tend to be quiet and certain. My parents thought this was a phase. When I was 15, I placed first in a statewide short fiction competition. 143 entries from high school students across Ohio. First place. A $1,000 award, a letter from a published author, and a story that appeared in the State Arts Council's annual anthology. I came home with the certificate and showed my mother. She said, "That's wonderful. Now imagine what you could do if you put that energy towards something practical." I told myself she just didn't understand the field, that she would see eventually what it could become. When I was 17 and beginning to apply to colleges, I told my parents I wanted to study English literature with a creative writing concentration at Harrington University, a 4-year school 4 hours away with a strong humanities program and a faculty I had researched carefully. My parents wanted me to go to the community college 20 minutes from home for 2 years first, then transfer somewhere local, then get a job near home, then do the sequence Renee had done in the genre that suited me. We went back and forth for months. Finally, I applied to Harrington on my own, using a fee waiver, without telling them. I got in. I received a merit scholarship covering 60% of tuition. When I showed them the acceptance letter and the scholarship award, my mother cried, not the good kind, and said she was worried I was making a mistake. My father said he hoped I knew what I was doing. Neither of them said congratulations. I went anyway. For 3 years, I built a life at Harrington that felt, for the first time, correctly sized for who I actually was. I studied with faculty who challenged me. I workshopped stories that got better semester by semester. I was invited into the honors program at the end of my sophomore year. I became the editor of the literary journal in my junior year, took the publication from 4 issues annually to 6, and tripled its submission rate. My parents visited once, in the fall of my sophomore year, and seemed to spend most of the time cataloging the ways it was not a sensible school for a sensible future. My mother asked my roommate what she was studying. When my roommate said pre-law, my mother nodded in a way that said everything. I stopped telling them about achievements because telling them had started to feel like offering something to people who responded by questioning the value of the gift. I stopped because the specific pain of sharing something you were proud of and receiving skepticism in return is a very particular kind of exhausting, and I had limited energy that I needed for other things. I called home weekly. I kept the calls light. I managed the distance with careful cheerfulness and said very little about what I was actually doing. The first semester of my senior year, I began work on my honors thesis, a novella, 90 pages, workshopped across 8 months under the supervision of my thesis advisor, Professor Lena Ferris, who had published 3 novels and who described my draft in her written evaluation as the most formally confident piece of student fiction I have reviewed in 11 years of thesis supervision. That evaluation was dated October. Also in October, my mother called and said she had been talking to some of the other parents at Renee's hospital fundraiser and had heard that the job market for English majors was very difficult and that perhaps I should consider switching my major in my final year to something more practical. I told her I was 8 months from graduation. She said it was never too late to make a sensible choice. I did not argue. I said I would think about it. I hung up and sat on the floor of my apartment for a while, and then I got up and went back to the novella. In November, I received notification that my thesis had been selected as one of 3 nominated for the university's Outstanding Honors Thesis Award. The selection was made by a faculty committee chaired by Dr. Patricia Wembley, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. I had met Dr. Wembley twice, once at an honors convocation and once at a literary journal event she had attended. She was precise and warm and took student work seriously in a way that was not universal among administrators of her level. When she called to tell me about the nomination, she said, "Your thesis reads like the work of someone who has been doing this a long time, in the best sense." I thanked her and then went into the bathroom and cried for approximately 4 minutes because I had been carrying the weight of my parents' skepticism for 3 years, and those words from someone like her landed somewhere deep and tender and necessary. I won the award in December, $2,500 and a formal recognition at commencement. I did not tell my parents about the award before graduation day. I want to explain why, because I think it matters. I had developed, over 4 years, a specific and hard-won clarity about what sharing things with my parents cost me. Not because they were cruel people, they were not, I want to say that plainly, but because they had a fixed idea of what my education should have been, and any evidence that it had been something good instead of something wasteful disrupted that idea in ways they found uncomfortable, and their discomfort expressed itself as doubt, and their doubt expressed itself on me. I had learned to protect my good things until they were solid enough to withstand the weight of being questioned. The thesis award was solid. Graduation was solid. I invited them because I wanted them there. Despite everything, I wanted them there. They drove up the morning of the ceremony with my aunt and cousins and Petra and the family friends. We took pictures in the parking lot. My mother fixed my tassel. My father said he was proud of me in the careful, slightly stiff way he said things when he meant them, but didn't quite know how to carry them out of his body. Then I went to line up with my graduating class, and they went into the auditorium. What I learned later, what Petra told me, word by word, in a phone call 3 days after the ceremony, was this. In the lobby, while people were finding seats and greeting each other, a family friend named Mary Ellen had asked my mother how she was feeling about today. And my mother had said, with the particular flattened affect of someone who has been managing an embarrassment for a while, that things hadn't quite gone as planned, that I had struggled more than expected, that I had actually left school the previous semester, that today was something I was here for as a guest. Mary Ellen had said quietly, "But I thought she was graduating today." My mother had said she didn't want to get into the details, that it was a difficult situation, that she hoped everyone would be supportive. She had then, across the next 15 minutes, repeated some version of this to my aunt, my 2 cousins, and the other family friends. Petra had said nothing because she knew the truth, and was trying to understand what she was watching. What none of them saw, because they were looking at my mother, was Dr. Patricia Wembley, 3 rows back, who had taken her seat before any of this began, who had excellent hearing, who knew exactly who Jocelyn Marsh was, what she had accomplished, and what her name would sound like when it was read from a stage in approximately 40 minutes. I walked across that stage. I shook the president's hand. I heard my name, and then the ceremony concluded with the recognition of the outstanding honors thesis recipients. Dr. Wembley stepped to the podium. She read 3 names. Mine was the 3rd. She said, "Jocelyn Marsh, for a thesis demonstrating exceptional literary craft and formally mature narrative control. Miss Marsh, would you please stand?" I stood. 4,000 people applauded. I looked out from my row and found my family's section. I could see my mother's face from where I sat, which was closer than she realized. I watched the moment it arrived, the moment the sequence completed itself in her understanding. The regalia, my name, the award, the applause. Dr. Wembley at the podium saying my name with the specific gravity of someone who has read the work and means what she is saying. My mother's face did something I had never seen it do before. After the ceremony, in the slow-moving crowd outside the auditorium, I found my family. Petra hugged me first, hard, and whispered, "She told everyone you dropped out." I said, "I know." She pulled back and looked at my face. "You knew?" "I didn't know for certain," I said, "but I know her." My aunt reached me next. She held my face in both hands and said, "I owe you an apology. I believed something I should have asked you about directly." Her eyes were bright. "I'm so sorry, Jocelyn." I told her it wasn't her fault. My cousins were quiet in the way of young people who have just watched an adult be wrong in public and are processing what that means about the reliability of adults. My mother stood slightly apart from the group. When I reached her, she looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her before. Not the managed, slightly martyred expression she wore when I had disappointed her expectations, but something rawer and less prepared. Something that looked, for once, like the actual feeling underneath all the management. She said, "I don't know why I said what I said." I looked at her for a moment. "I think you do know," I said, quietly, without anger. "I think you've been telling people that story for a long time, in smaller versions, and today it got out ahead of you." She opened her mouth. She closed it. My father put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just left it there, which was more than I expected, and enough for what the moment needed. Then Dr. Wembley appeared. She had come looking for me, which I had not expected. She shook my hand and said the kind of specific, considered things about my thesis that showed she had actually read it, which was the most generous thing a busy dean could offer a graduating student. She was warm with my family in the easy way of someone who is not performing warmth, but simply has it. When she turned to my mother, she said, "You must be very proud. The thesis committee considered Jocelyn's work the strongest in the honors cohort this year. She has a real future in this." My mother said, "Yes, we are." It was not an apology. It was not a reckoning. It was 2 words, offered into a space where something more substantial was owed. And I noted the smallness of it, and I chose, on that day, in that parking lot sun, to receive it anyway. Not because it was enough, but because it was what she had, and because I was 27 years old with a diploma in my hand and an award on my transcript and a future that had nothing to do with her fear. The drive back to campus afterward, Petra and I in her car, windows down, was one of the best hours of my adult life. We didn't talk about my mother for most of it. We talked about the novella, about what I wanted to write next, about a graduate program in creative writing that I had been quietly researching for 6 months and had not yet told my parents about. I applied in January. I was accepted in March with a full teaching fellowship covering tuition and providing a $19,000 annual stipend. I told my parents by letter. I mailed it the day I accepted the offer. I was not ready for a phone call, and I needed to say the things I needed to say in the order I needed to say them, without being interrupted or redirected or managed. I told them what had happened at graduation, what Petra had told me, what my aunt had confirmed. I told them I was not writing to punish them or to reopen a wound. I was writing because I had spent 4 years of my education protecting my good things from their doubt, and I was no longer willing to do that. I was 27 years old, and I was going to graduate school on a full fellowship, and I intended to tell them things as they happened, directly and honestly, and I needed them to receive those things differently than they had been receiving them. I told them I loved them, and that this was what loving them honestly looked like from my side. My mother called 2 days after the letter arrived. She cried, which I had expected. She said things that were partly defensive and partly genuine, which I had also expected. Near the end of the call, after the defensive part had mostly exhausted itself, she said something I had not expected. She said, "I've been afraid for you since you were 15. I thought if I worried out loud it would protect you somehow. I understand now that it didn't protect you. It just hurt you." That was the most self-aware thing my mother had ever said to me. I held the phone and I breathed and I said, "Thank you for saying that." We are different now, my mother and I. Not transformed, I want to be honest about that, because transformation takes longer than 9 months and requires more than one phone call. But different. She asks about the program. She asked, last month, what my thesis advisor is like. She listened to the answer. Those are small things. I have learned to let small things be the beginning of something rather than evidence that nothing has changed. My father visited last spring, alone, just him and me. A weekend trip I had suggested and he had accepted with an alacrity that surprised us both. We walked around the city where I now live. We ate at a good restaurant. He asked me to explain what I was working on, and I did. And he listened in the careful way of someone who does not have the vocabulary yet, but is trying to learn it. On the last morning, over coffee, he said, "I never told you I thought you were talented. I believed it. I just never said it because I was scared the world wouldn't agree, and I didn't want you to be hurt." I said, "The world agreed, Dad." He looked at his coffee. "Yeah," he said. "I see that now." If you are someone who has spent years protecting your best things from people who were supposed to celebrate them, who has learned to go quiet about your achievements to spare yourself the exhaustion of doubt, I want to say this to you. You do not have to earn their belief before you believe in yourself. Their doubt is not the measure of your worth. It is the measure of their fear, and their fear is theirs to carry. Do the work. Find the people who read it carefully. Accept the fellowship. Walk across the stage. Let them be seated 3 rows back when the truth arrives. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, has anyone ever told a story about you that wasn't true? How did the truth finally come out? Drop your answer below. I read every single one. Until next time, your name will be read aloud someday. Make sure you're standing when it happens.